When you hear the word murderer, you probably imagine an adult. But what if the person behind the crime was only 11 years old? Before you judge her actions, there's something you need to know. Because sometimes the most disturbing crimes don't begin with a weapon, they begin with a childhood. And this story proves just how dangerous that can be. Mary Florence Bell was born on May 26, 1957 in northern England. From the very start, stability was something she rarely knew. Her mother, Betty Bell, was a local prostitute who was often away from home for long periods, leaving Mary and her siblings behind. Sometimes they were left with their father, sometimes they were left with whoever happened to be around. As a child, Mary grew up feeling abandoned and unwanted. The person she believed was her father, Billy Bell, was a violent alcoholic with a long criminal record. Armed robbery, constant trouble with the law, and a volatile temper were all part of the environment Mary was exposed to. Yet even his role in her life was surrounded by uncertainty because no one knows for sure whether he was actually her biological father. Long before her name would shock the nation, Mary was a little girl growing up in a home filled with neglect, instability, and unanswered questions, conditions that would cast a dark shadow over the years that followed. To understand Mary, you have to understand the way she was treated from the moment she entered the world. According to her aunt Isa McCricket, Mary was never truly wanted. In fact, just minutes after giving birth, her mother reportedly reacted with anger when hospital staff tried to place the newborn in her arms, shouting, "Take the thing away from me." If true, that was indeed a tough way for a child to grow up in an environment where rejection and neglect were part of life instead of love. In a place where love could barely be found, Mary grew up in the midst of the hatred of someone who was meant to take care of her and nurture her into a responsible adult. And if Mary's life had been difficult up to that point, it was about to become even more disturbing. As a baby and young child, Mary was frequently injured while left alone with her mother. The incidents became so common that members of her own family began to suspect that these weren't simply accidents. Some believed her mother was either dangerously neglectful or deliberately trying to harm her. On one occasion, Mary reportedly fell from a first-floor window while in her mother's care. On another, she was allegedly given sleeping pills at a very young age. But perhaps the most shocking allegation came when her mother is said to have arranged for Mary to be given away to another woman who desperately wanted a child of her own. The situation became so serious that Mary's older sister, Catherine, reportedly had to travel across Newcastle by herself to find Mary and bring her back home. For most children, home is a place of safety. For Mary, it was becoming a place of uncertainty, neglect, and fear. A childhood that seemed to grow darker with each passing year. But the darkest part of Mary's childhood was still hidden behind closed doors. Despite the abuse and neglect, Betty refused repeated offers from relatives who wanted to take Mary into their care. According to later allegations, Mary's childhood became even more traumatic as her mother exposed her to severe sexual abuse by some of her clients. Instead of protecting her daughter, Betty was accused of being directly involved in these acts. By the mid-1960s, Mary was growing up in an environment marked not only by neglect and violence, but also by profound exploitation and trauma. As Mary grew older, the effects of her troubled childhood became increasingly visible. Both at home and at school, she displayed disturbing and unpredictable behavior. She frequently got into fights with other children, suffered sudden mood swings, and often acted aggressively toward her classmates. On several occasions, she allegedly tried to choke or suffocate other children, alarming those around her and causing many to avoid her. As a result, Mary struggled to form normal friendships and spent much of her time with a neighboring girl named Norma Bell. Despite sharing the same surname, the two were not related. By 1967, the friendship between Mary and Norma would place them at the center of a story that would soon shock all of England. By 1968, Mary's erratic behavior had become such an issue that even her classmates noticed the signs. As one schoolmate remembers, every time she began to shake her head and look at someone in that cold stare, we knew what was about to happen. Her unpredictability and volatile reactions had become second nature to everyone at school, and the person whom she stared at was sure to receive her attention. This kind of reaction had long ceased to surprise her peers, as it had developed into something to fear. Mary had always been known for her strange and frightening behavior. On May 11, 1968, a 3-year-old boy was found wandering the streets, injured and covered in blood, after suffering a serious head wound. When questioned, the child told police he had been playing with Mary Bell and her friend Norma Bell on top of an abandoned air raid shelter before falling nearly 7 feet to the ground. He couldn't say which of the two girls had pushed him. That same evening, the parents of 3 other young children contacted police with another disturbing complaint. They claimed that Mary and Norma had attempted to strangle their daughters while they were playing together in a nearby sandpit. When police questioned the girls, both denied being responsible for the injured boy. Mary also denied any involvement in the strangulation allegations. Norma, however, admitted that Mary had tried to choke the girls. Although these incidents raised serious concerns, they were not treated as major warnings at the time. Looking back, however, many would later see them as chilling signs of the violence that was about to unfold. According to Norma, Mary approached one of the girls and asked a disturbing question. "What happens if you choke someone? Do they die?" Moments later, she allegedly grabbed the girl by the throat and began squeezing. When told to stop, she reportedly ignored the warning and moved on to 2 other girls, attempting to choke them as well. The incidents were serious enough for police to notify local authorities and raise concerns about Mary's violent behavior. However, because both Mary and Norma were still children, they received only a warning. No further action was taken. At the time, it may have seemed like nothing more than troubling childhood behavior. But in hindsight, many would view these incidents as missed warning signs. Warnings that something far more sinister was about to happen. On May 25, 1968, when she was only 1 day away from turning 11 years old, the worst thing possible occurred. In an abandoned home in St. Margaret's Road, Mary left Martin Brown, who was 4 years old at the time, by himself. In her first murder, investigators claim that Mary suffocated Martin. 3 other children walked into the abandoned property shortly after and stumbled upon something terrible. In an upstairs room, Martin lay on the ground with his arms outstretched over his head. To an initial observation, there were few traces of physical abuse. There was only some blood and foam in his mouth to indicate foul play. John Hall, a local laborer, soon arrived to revive the child with CPR, but it was too late. At the end of the day, the child was dead, and nobody had a clue that the killer was a 12-year-old girl. But what happened next made the case even stranger. While people were desperately trying to save Martin's life, guess who suddenly appeared at the doorway? Mary Bell and her friend Norma. They stood there watching the scene unfold before being told to leave. A short time later, the 2 girls went to Martin's relatives and delivered the news themselves, saying that one of the children had been hurt and that they thought it was Martin. Now here's where things get even more unusual. When doctors examined Martin's body the next day, they couldn't find any obvious signs of violence. There were no clear injuries that could explain how the 4-year-old had died. Investigators were left confused, and without enough evidence to determine the exact cause of death, the case remained a mystery. At that moment, nobody suspected that the person responsible for Martin's death had already been at the scene, calmly watching everything happen right in front of them. But the very next day, on Mary's 11th birthday, she and Norma were involved in yet another disturbing incident. The two girls broke into a local nursery school, causing damage throughout the building before escaping. When staff arrived the following morning, they discovered something even more unsettling: several handwritten notes scattered around the scene. And these weren't ordinary prank notes. The messages claimed responsibility for Martin Brown's death, with some openly bragging about the murder and warning that more killings could follow. You'd think such notes would immediately make the girls prime suspects, but at the time, police dismissed them as nothing more than a childish prank, crude messages written by attention-seeking kids. What investigators didn't realize was that these notes may have been one of the earliest clues pointing directly to the person behind Martin's death. Just 2 days after Martin's death and shortly before his funeral, Mary and Norma went to the home of Martin's mother, June Brown. They knocked on the door and casually asked if they could see Martin. Confused, June told the girls that they couldn't see him because he was dead. Mary's response was immediate and unsettling. "Oh, I know he's dead. I want to see him in his coffin." Imagine hearing those words from an 11-year-old child. At the time, nobody knew what Mary had done, but looking back, the comment would take on a far darker meaning, almost as if she was drawn to the tragedy she had helped create. Then, on July 31st, 1968, another child disappeared. 3-year-old Brian Howe had been playing outside his home with other children, including Mary and Norma Bell. When he failed to return home, his family and neighbors launched a desperate search. Late that night, Brian's body was discovered hidden between large concrete blocks. Investigators quickly realized this case was very different from Martin Brown's. Brian had been strangled, and there were clear signs that the killer had tried to conceal the body. The crime scene revealed a level of violence that shocked investigators. Evidence suggested that the killer had not only taken Brian's life, but had also returned to the body afterward. Most chilling of all, the injuries indicated that the person responsible was likely another child. For the first time, police began to seriously consider a possibility that seemed almost impossible to believe. A child killer might be living among them. The discovery of Brian Howe's body triggered a massive investigation, with more than 100 detectives working the case and over 1,200 children questioned. Among those interviewed were Mary Bell and Norma Bell, who had been seen playing with Brian shortly before his disappearance. Both girls admitted being with him earlier that day, but claimed they hadn't seen him after lunchtime. However, during a later interview, Mary made a critical mistake. While trying to shift suspicion onto another local boy, she mentioned a pair of broken scissors that she claimed he had been carrying. The problem? Police had never revealed that broken scissors had been found near Brian's body. That detail immediately caught investigators' attention. When the boy Mary accused was checked out, his alibi proved solid. For detectives, Mary's statement became a major breakthrough and the first strong indication that she knew far more about the murder than she should have. A few days later, the investigation took a decisive turn. On August 4th, Norma Bell's parents contacted the police, saying their daughter wanted to talk about Brian Howe's death. When detectives arrived, Norma was formally cautioned and then asked to explain what she knew. Norma told them that Mary had taken her to a location known as the Tin Lizzie, where she was shown Brian's body. She claimed Mary then demonstrated how she had strangled him and even admitted to enjoying what she had done. Norma also described details about injuries to the child's body and led police to key evidence, including a hidden razor blade at the scene. The following day, Mary was questioned again. This time, she became defensive and accused the officers of trying to manipulate her, even saying she would get a solicitor to get her out of the situation. Norma was later interviewed again and gave a full statement, admitting she was present during the incident, but saying she panicked and ran away, leaving Mary alone with Brian. Forensic evidence then strengthened the case further. Fibers found on Brian's body matched clothing belonging to both girls, Mary's woolen dress and Norma's skirt. Even more significantly, similar fibers had already been found on another earlier victim, linking the cases together. At this point, investigators believed they finally understood the full picture of what had happened. Brian Howe was buried on August 7, 1968, in a funeral attended by over 200 people. As the coffin was taken from the house, detectives noticed something deeply unsettling. Mary Bell was standing outside, reportedly laughing and rubbing her hands while watching the funeral procession. That same evening, both Mary and Norma were formally charged with Brian's murder. Mary's reaction was disturbingly calm, simply saying, "That's all right by me," while Norma broke down in tears and denied everything. Later, Mary gave a written statement admitting she was present at the scene but tried to shift the blame onto Norma. She also confessed to earlier vandalism at a nursery and acknowledged involvement in the notes left behind after Martin Brown's death. At this stage, both girls were officially at the center of one of the most shocking child murder cases in British history. In the end, the outcomes for the two girls were very different. Mary Bell was found guilty of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, meaning the court accepted that her mental state played a significant role in her actions. She was detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, an indefinite sentence in a secure institution, and was later released in 1980 when she was 23 years old. After her release, her identity was protected and she was given a new life under strict anonymity. Norma Bell, on the other hand, was acquitted of both murder and manslaughter. The court did not find enough evidence to hold her legally responsible for the killings. She was also granted anonymity after the case and allowed to move on with her life in private.